I'm Hannah Allen, and in 2019, I was a student at Honeygrove Middle School. Myself and a group of...
Excuse me, let me get you to pull your mics a little closer to you or get closer to them so we can hear you.
In 2019, I was a student at Honeygrove Middle School. Myself and a group of about 30 students prayed for a former classmate who had been injured in a motor vehicle accident. We went to an unoccupied side of the cafeteria out of the way of any other students and said a short prayer. After our prayer, our principal addressed the group and said, "Don't do that again." Myself and others were confused, and some upset parents had called about the incident. The following day, our principal informed us that we could pray, but we had to do so behind closed doors or behind a curtain. By doing this, he violated our right to freely exercise our religion. After a little research, my mom found First Liberty, who quickly got to work on our case. A letter was sent to the school informing them that they needed to amend this rule and apologize for their actions against our rights. While our principal was apologizing, he made the whole situation seem like it was a misunderstanding and I had blown the situation out of proportion. The principal at the school never accepted fault for what they had done. However, the only thing that mattered to me was the protection of students' rights. There was a sacrifice in standing up for these rights. I no longer felt welcome at a church I grew up going to. Teachers and parents stopped talking to my mom. I also felt as though I was treated differently from other students. Later on in January of 2020, I was invited to tell my story in the Oval Office. I told President Trump and did a pre-interview with Fox News. I shared my story because what happened at my school wasn't right, and I know that it is going on in other schools as well. I was extremely blessed with the opportunity and honored to be a part of something bigger. The reaction of my community was not what I had expected. Before I had even returned from Washington, teachers and parents of my school district began saying very negative things about me on social media. My family was bombarded with messages and posts saying my story was not true and that I make this school and community look bad. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and I even had seniors talking about me and staring at me as I walked down the halls. They called me a liar and said that I just wanted my 5 minutes of fame. People that I had known my entire life said very hurtful things. I went back to school despite the backlash I had received. Not long after, my superintendent issued a letter to the entire school district stating, "The public and social media criticism of the district, and in particular our administrators, has been unfair and based upon false information. I would ask that the members of the community refrain from repeating this false information on social media as it distracts our focus from our students and their education." The day it was sent out, the superintendent went to every classroom except mine. He read the letter to every student, but couldn't read it to me. When that letter was handed to me, I read a few sentences and walked out of the classroom. I called my mom and told her what was happening. She immediately came to the school and picked me up. When we got to the office to sign out, my superintendent was waiting for us. He told us that it wasn't a personal attack and that he would stop anyone who has said negative things about me. My mom stated that people were already saying horrible things, and he just added fuel to their fire. They took my words as a personal attack on their image rather than what they truly were. My mom asked me if I wanted to move schools because of the backlash. I thought about it for a while, but then I realized that with God, I was strong enough to face these people. I felt like an outcast in my own school and my community. Some days were harder than others, but I knew that I had done the right thing. God gave me the strength to be a voice for those who didn't have one. I'm honored to be that voice.
Members, if you want to ask a question, and we'll do a few questions with each one if you wish, instead of like we did the last time till the end, since we have multiple witnesses. If you hit the left button, light will flash, I'll know, or it will be red, I'll know that you want to ask a question. Kelly?
Hannah, I think one of the cool things to know now is, what are you doing now, years later, after all this persecution?
Since this happened, I decided to join the military. I've been in for 2 years now, so that's what I've done.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of a lot of Americans that what the principal did and what the superintendent did to you as a young girl to send a letter attacking you because the president had asked you to tell your story. You didn't know the president was going to ask you to tell your story when you were in the Oval Office during Trump's first term. And the disgrace of what they did, telling you had to go behind a curtain to pray for your friend. I'm sorry, and that should have never happened to you. And we hope that at the end of this commission, we can stop that from happening to other young students across the country. Thank you for your courage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next witness is Shay. Shay, we got a chance to hear just a little bit from you a little earlier. Was that pretty cool, meeting the president? And standing with him on stage? Yes. Shay, let us hear your story.
You start.
Okay. I'm his mom. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to share our story. My name is Jennifer Encinas. My husband Carlos and I strive to live out our Christian faith daily, not just in worship, but in raising our 3 beautiful children. We teach our children that God made them with intention and purpose, and that He created humans as male and female, a truth unaltered by feelings or social trends. Carlos and I have always supported our school community. We volunteered regularly, and our oldest son, Shay, thrived academically, socially, and in leadership roles until the 2023-24 school year at La Costa Heights Elementary School in the Encinitas Union School District. On May 1st, 2024, Shay came home visibly disturbed. His normal 5th grade buddy time with kindergartners was replaced by a reading, video, and chalk activity of My Shadow is Pink, a book on gender identity. Shay was forced to participate in an activity promoting the book's message and teaching his kindergarten buddy about gender ideology against his beliefs.
As my teacher read the book, My Shadow is Pink, I could tell immediately that the message went against my beliefs. It taught that gender could be chosen based on feelings rather than the way God created us. I didn't have any choice. I had to participate. We were then told to line up and head to our buddy class, where we watched a cartoon version of the book. I felt sick. I wanted to protect my buddy, cover his eyes even, but I didn't want to get in trouble. Then we went outside to trace our buddy's shadows with chalk. The teacher told each child to pick a color to represent him or her. I felt upset and confused, but I stayed quiet because I was afraid of getting in trouble. I didn't know this was coming. I wish I could have opted out. After school, my dad picked me up and I told him everything. He was shocked and promised to talk to the school. I hoped that would make things better. Instead, it made things worse, much worse.
School officials never notified us, even though we had just opted Shay out of the school's health unit for this very reason. When we brought the concerns up to his teacher, he claimed the book wasn't about gender, yet the author calls it a story about gender identity, and district documents show an effort supported by groups like Trans Family Support Services to promote this ideology without parental input or awareness. When we emailed the principal and superintendent, instead of responding to us, Principal Christy Kay contacted several of Shay's closest friends and their families, suggesting we were trying to get teachers fired. Sorry. And that we were hateful and we wanted to remove books about kindness and inclusivity, but all we wanted was to opt out. We were told by several community members that Principal Kay coordinated with the PTA board, room parents, and others to plan a Pink Out the Hate Day, specifically to shame our children for objecting to being used to promote this political agenda. I received a group text message from the room mom of our younger son's class that went out to most parents in 3rd grade saying, "I just talked to the principal and asked how we can help. She said, express your support for our school and teachers. Be a louder voice. Wear pink. Send messages to Mrs. West and Mr. Murphy, or if you see them, tell them we support them and the message of equity and inclusion." My husband, Carlos, received text messages from someone who turned out to be the husband of the teacher who introduced My Shadow is Pink. He told Carlos to move to a remote island and threatened him. When Carlos reported this to Superintendent Gray, she offered no help. The PTA president and others posted on Instagram urging participation in the Pink Out the Hate event. This was especially hurtful as the Instagram posts spread quickly throughout the community. These were the absolute hardest days of my life as a mother. All the while, I was at home taking care of our newborn daughter. I felt like I couldn't breathe, I couldn't sleep. All I could do was pray. How could this school and these people treat our family like this? Our kids have grown up together, and instead of defending them, they were acting with such hate towards them. But beyond our circle of friends, why was the school spreading lies and promoting the bullying of my 9 and 11-year-old sons over their religious beliefs? For example, the daughter of school board member Tom Morton messaged me saying our family was a disgrace to the community, told us to pull our kids out, and warned that teachers would know we were hateful hypocrites.
On the Pink Out the Hate Day, I felt like the entire school, including teachers, administrators, and classmates I counted as friends, were standing against me and ridiculing my beliefs. My little brother, who was also being bullied by that time because of our beliefs, refused to go to school. I cried that morning, but decided to try and be brave and see who would stand with me. But over half the school wore pink. I felt completely alone. The rest of the school year didn't improve. Some of my friends' parents even told them not to spend time with me. But I kept trusting God. I knew He was with me and would carry me through. Sadly, my family felt we had no choice but to withdraw from the school district I had loved. We transferred to a private school where we now feel loved, supported, and safe every day. Every day, I thank God for giving me a new place to grow, learn, and be myself. Looking back, my experience at La Costa Heights still makes me sad, but it also reminds me how strong my faith is and how faithful God has been to me. I'm sharing my story not for attention, but in the hope that no other child or family has to go through what mine did.
With the help of First Liberty Institute, we filed a lawsuit to help make sure parents in the future have the right to know and opt out of situations like this. Still, even after leaving and successfully asserting our rights, the harassment continues. Our hope is that sharing our story today will preserve the rights of parents to direct their children's moral and religious upbringings, especially on sensitive topics like sex and gender. Thank you for your time.
Members, if you want to make a comment or ask a question, hit your left button. Dr. Carson.
Shay, that's a very impressive display of courage, and I think that that's what's missing. When I was running for president, I traveled all over the country and discovered that from the smallest little hamlets to the largest cities, one thing that the American people shared in common was common sense. But also discovered that what they shared in common was lack of courage. And you've got to be brave if you're going to be free. What gave you your courage, and what would you suggest for others?
Well, I really wanted to stand up for my rights. That's what gave me the most courage. Like, I knew that God was going to be with me the whole time, and that's what gave me like the motivation to keep going and to keep fighting for my rights, because I didn't want it to happen to any other family.
That's a great example.
Carrie?
I just want to say you are a hero, Shay. You really are.
Thank you.
I am so proud I would like Carlos to stand, the father, and we can all give him a round of applause for raising an incredible son. Thank you, Carlos. And thank you, Jenny. You two have raised an incredible son who is a hero to so many. And I want to say that this is in my district in California. This is a radical school district. And so thank you, First Liberty, for taking on this case. One of the other attorneys is here today, Rob Reynolds. Thank you, Rob, for being a part of this case. And I hope you take it all the way and you receive the justice you deserve. Thank you, Shay.
Any other questions? Jenny, were there any repercussions for that principal in that school district?
She was actually promoted
and the teacher who was involved was promoted. Everybody has just been praised. There was a school board meeting after this event occurred where my husband tried to speak out, and the teachers union came in full force with matching shirts and doubled down on their message of equity and inclusion. And it was so just hurtful that they didn't realize like they were attacking my son with that event, and the whole message of equity and inclusion was there for everybody except Christians. So no, there's been no repercussions.
Not only was it a denial of your religious liberty, it was just mean and hurtful. And I think it's hard for America watching to understand why a principal, a teacher, an entire school system, and so many parents were so mean and so hurtful.
Yeah, I agree. We still don't know. It changed our community, our whole trajectory of our lives. But we're here today, and just thank you for this opportunity to share this story. I'm sorry, it makes me so emotional because it was a lot to go through.
Hey, a number of us could tear up on this story. Shay, I have a grandson, looks just like you. You could be brothers, your age. And I would hate to think that anyone would hurt my grandson like they hurt yours. And everyone should understand that can happen to your child, your grandchildren. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Our next witness, I hope I'm saying this right, Aliza Lewin. Hello, do I have the right person on my list? Yes, no, yes. Say that.
Samira Munshi.
Yes. We'll go to Lana Roman, and we'll see what's, okay, Lana, you're next.
Chair Patrick, Vice Chair Carson, and members of the Religious Liberty Commission, thank you for having me here today. My name is Svetlana Roman, and I'm here today as a mother and a Ukrainian Orthodox Christian. My husband Jeffrey and I were among the many families in Montgomery County, Maryland, who were forced to go all the way to the United States Supreme Court to defend our constitutional rights to religious freedom. I'm here today to bring attention to the assault on religious freedoms that is being carried out in public schools around the country. My husband grew up in Montgomery County and insisted that we move to a very specific district within the county because of the renowned quality public education he remembered growing up. When we sent our young son to elementary school, we expected the school to educate him in reading, writing, and math, while we as parents would bear the responsibility and duty to teach our faith and values and guide his spiritual and moral formation. In 2022, Montgomery County first introduced storybooks focusing on gender transitions and same-sex romance to the elementary curriculum. As Christians, we teach our son that every person is loved by God and should be treated with dignity and respect. We also teach him that sex is a gift from God and a natural, unchanging part of who we are. Many of these books introduce sexual concepts to children at inappropriately young age, putting the children into untenable position of having to question who to trust, their teachers or their parents. Rather than focusing on simple basic civility and kindness, these books championed pride parades, gender transitioning, and pronoun preferences for elementary-age children. Elementary-age children who are just beginning to learn phonics. Some books encourage students to discuss what it means to be non-binary. Other books told students that doctors only guess when identifying a newborn's sex. Teachers were instructed to tell students that they were being hurtful if they questioned these controversial ideologies. In Maryland, as in most states, instruction about family life and human sexuality in health class requires parental notification and an explicit signed parental approval, effectively an opt-in. Somehow, these books were receiving a different treatment with no requirement for parental opt-in. Parent concerns with the new curriculum were widespread, and at first, the school board honored opt-out requests. Montgomery County is the nation's most religiously diverse county. many of the school principals warned the school board that many families would be offended by the books and concerned that they were not age appropriate. So as a reasonable person might anticipate, a large number of parents looked to opt out from these lessons. But instead of reconsidering the curriculum, the school board was tone deaf to many concerns that were raised and revoked any notification and opt-outs altogether. This unprecedented decision by the board turned what should have been a conversation between parents and educators into a conflict that never needed to exist in the first place. Even though we never asked the school to remove the books, the board suddenly disregarded a long-standing tradition, Maryland law, and the nationwide consensus on parental opt-outs. We were denied the obvious and simple solution that would allow our children to not be exposed to content that directly contradicts our religious beliefs and teachings. In the name of inclusivity, the school board disregarded, alienated, and excluded faith-based communities from consideration. It took 2 years for the Supreme Court's decision, which agreed with us and affirmed that parents have the right to opt out their children out of the storybooks, restoring the status quo. In the meantime, most families had to make significant changes and sacrifices in order to not forfeit their faith. The court said that teaching these books without opt-outs was an unconstitutional burden to our free exercise rights as parents. As the court put it, it is both insulting and legally unsound to tell parents that they must abstain from public education in order to raise their children in their religious faith, when alternatives can be prohibitively expensive and they already contribute to financing the public schools. As a mother, my love for my child compels me to guide his formation, to protect his young, developing heart and mind. Parents, not teachers, schools, or the government, carry the primary responsibility. I'm just thinking about yours. Of how they raise their children. However, the school board total disregard of reasonable parents' concerns that we experience in Montgomery County is only a symptom of a much more systemic nationwide problem, an educational culture that is hostile to religion and historically orthodox religious views. Our case should be the beginning, not the end, of building an educational system that is more responsive to religious rights and parental concerns. As a commissioners, you have the opportunity to continue the work that families in Montgomery County started, and thank you for everything you will do to make sure that schools across the country honor the Supreme Court's decision, Mahmoud versus Taylor. Thank you.
Samira Munshi.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I begin in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Hi, my name is Samira Munshi. I was born and raised in Southwest Missouri, where, as you can probably imagine, I grew up involved in a lot of interfaith conversations. And these conversations led me to my work today as an activist and advocate for the Muslim community in America. I'm the former executive director of the Coalition of Virtue, and I currently serve on an advisory board to the Religious Liberty Commission. I was asked to speak today because of my work with families and students in Montgomery County, Maryland during the 2023 school district opt-out protests. The efforts of these families ultimately led to the Supreme Court case, Mahmoud versus Taylor, that recently ruled in favor of their rights. Today, I want to share more about what we experienced during that time in organizing, why it matters, and what I believe this commission can do to meaningfully protect freedom of conscience and freedom of speech, especially in the classroom. To begin, I'll offer some background, as Svetlana probably already gave most of it, but in 2023, Montgomery County Public School System, while instituting mandatory classroom content on issues of gender and sexuality, stated they would no longer allow parents to opt their children out of such content when in the past they had. As a result, many families, including Muslim, Christian, and Jewish parents and students, were concerned, to say the least. And Muslims quickly realized, as she mentioned, it's a religiously diverse community, and with a lot of Muslims, and the Muslim community there realized that we needed to do something about what was going on. So Muslim leaders reached out to these other faith communities to organize and make our voices heard, and we faced a lot of backlash. In that backlash, we were called things like white supremacists and backward. We were reminded that Muslims are not only marginalized religiously, but in every move we make, we are treated as outsiders whose rights are conditional or an afterthought. What happened in Montgomery County was not about Muslims and other people of faith trying to impose their values on others. It was about refusing to have others' values imposed on us. It was about the right to dissent without being demonized. Freedom of speech means little if certain communities are socially or legally punished for using it. On issues like how to navigate the topic of LGBTQ, the Muslim community holds a wide range of views, and while these are conversations that are currently ongoing in our community, what is important is to accommodate American Muslims and other practitioners of religion within the law, regardless of their political affiliation or diversity of views, especially when they believe their religion to directly influence their views. Religious freedom demands free expression of belief, even if it conflicts with the beliefs of others. We've seen so much suppression and demonization, specifically of Muslims speaking out on LGBTQ, but also on issues like Palestine, based on the values of our faith. Take the example of when the Lower Merion School District forced a Muslim high schooler to remove her headscarf during graduation because it had a keffiyeh pattern, a symbol of Palestine, or when students were given the opportunity to paint their parking spaces in a New York high school parking lot with a design of their choosing, a Muslim student painted a watermelon on her parking space to represent Palestine with the words, "Peace be upon you," and the school painted over it, similar to the case Jeremy Dice mentioned earlier on. These are just a couple, but there are many examples of this kind of silencing. The values of all of our faiths teach us to speak up for humanity and morality, no matter who it is for or against. Whether a student says, "I believe there are only two genders," or "I believe Palestinians are undergoing a genocide," they should not be silenced or punished for expressing their beliefs. If religious freedom is to have any meaning at all, it must provide people of faith the freedom to express their convictions. In Palestine, Masjid al-Aqsa, and opposition to genocide are intrinsically religious issues for Muslims, not merely secular ones. We speak up for Gaza and oppressed people around the world because our religion teaches us that these are our brothers and sisters in humanity and faith, that justice is non-negotiable, that human dignity is sacrosanct, and that genocide is wrong. I'd like to offer some recommendations to the Commission. So first, opt-out protections must be made clear, accessible, and enforceable. Oftentimes, these policies are in place on paper, but can be difficult to actualize. Second, laws on religious liberty must be implemented with transparency and consistency. Public institutions need guidance and accountability to ensure that they're not silencing only a particular viewpoint or voices on one particular issue. I sincerely hope and pray that your devotion to God and loyalty to this country, the Constitution, and the vision of our founders supersedes any external pressures or negative assumptions of our faith that may push you to overlook the rights of American Muslims, and that you act to preserve our rights as Americans to freedom of conscience, free speech, and free exercise. Thank you.
Paula?
Yes, thank you both so much. The First Amendment protects the right of parents to direct their children's education and upbringing, and the court has reaffirmed this and affirmed this truth many times, most recently in Mahmoud versus Taylor. So how can this administration ensure that the state and local governments protect parental right in educational contexts, and how can we hold them accountable to follow the law?
Anyone can answer that?
I'll try to address the question. To be very honest and transparent, because the health and human sexuality and health curriculum is an actual opt-in, I personally believe these type of materials just need to go into the health and human sexuality curriculum piece. That way, every parent treats it the same exact way. Otherwise, these materials are embedded into educational system, not only in your English classes, they're in math. These materials are just saturated through the curriculum, starting with elementary schools.
And I would add that there need to be clear guidelines in place and communicated very clearly to both the school boards, the school districts, and also the students and parents in those districts, explaining exactly what they are allowed to opt out from, in what scenarios, et cetera.
Dave, go ahead.
I was just going to add two suggestions. One of them is there are certain states that have protections for families' rights and responsibilities in schools, and to have a federal act to encourage Congress and the administration to pass a federal act, because that protects all parental rights, not only to be notified of these things going on, but to also to make sure that there's opt-out options that have some teeth to them.
Dave, is this phenomena, this didn't happen, as we like to say, when we were in school. When did this begin? When did this shift begin?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things that it doesn't happen overnight, but it feels like when certain elite institutions, the media, academia, Hollywood, catch on to a particular theme, then they run with it. And they act like all of us don't exist, and the majority of people everywhere accept all these transgender things they're doing to kids, and to the preferred pronouns and names, and the things that I think most Americans would object to regardless of what your political or ideological stance. So I think it sets its foot, and what they do is they shame us from speaking out against it by labeling us as haters and bigots, ostracizing us, pushing out of the schools, so we have no voice at all. And so I think it's happened over a period of years. I think it's going to continue to happen unless all of us take a stand. This commission is a great way to stop it. President Trump seeing this and doing something about it. But I think all of us need to be more vocal, not less. Don't be afraid of being shamed to stand what you believe in, because it's one of the most important things our country is founded on.
Our next witness is Jennifer Mead.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share our story today. There's nothing more precious to a mother and a father than their child, and there's nothing we wouldn't sacrifice to help them thrive. It is our God-given duty to guide them emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And as a mother, when I place my children in the temporary care of others, like at school, I don't surrender my parental rights. Like most parents, my husband and I expect transparency and truth about how our children are doing in school to help them along their way. But tragically, this was not our story. Soon after our 11-year-old daughter started 6th grade at East Rockford Middle School, we noticed some changes. She seemed anxious, sad, and withdrawn. We thought it might be the stress of middle school, which can be hard for kids. So we continued to encourage her, support her, and make sure that she knew how deeply she was loved. As the school year went on, she started to fall behind academically, and I began working closely with her teachers and the school counselor. We wanted to do everything that we could to ensure that she flourished at school. I wanted her to know that we're in her corner. We would help her navigate any problems she faced, and that Jesus was right beside her every single day. Throughout 7th grade, we remained in close contact with the school, and I was especially grateful for the school counselor's help, and I valued the connection that she had made with my daughter. Still struggling, my husband and I took our daughter to see a psychologist who diagnosed her with autism. We shared that very personal information with the school counselor to ensure that she received the support and accommodations that she needed to thrive. It felt like a partnership with the school. And we even met up with the counselor for ice cream with both of our daughters that following summer. So given the regular and transparent communication that Dan and I had with the school counselor, I trusted this woman wholeheartedly until everything changed. In the fall of 8th grade, a school employee sent us an academic report with notes from my daughter's past and current teachers. But oddly, some of the teachers' notes talked about a boy, or at least referred to a boy's name and used male pronouns. I assumed this was a mistake. So I emailed the school employee to see if she had inadvertently included another child's information in the report, but she didn't respond. My husband and I discovered that the school, including the counselor that we had put so much trust in, was socially transitioning our daughter and hiding it from us. We later found out that teachers and staff had been treating our daughter as a boy without our knowledge. They continued to use her real name and accurate pronouns when communicating with us. I was shocked, betrayed, and heartbroken. We met with the principal hoping that he would be as shocked as we were, but he wasn't. He said it was school district and Michigan policy to treat our little girl as a boy without telling us. Going into this meeting, Dan and I had hoped that the principal would be as concerned as we were, but we left feeling devastated and not sure what to do next. There really are no words to capture the traumatic impact of the school's action on our young daughter and our family. And in the days and weeks that followed, it was like she was emerging from a cult. Multiple times a day, she would ask us if we loved her. She had been taught to not trust us, that we wouldn't understand her, and that we wouldn't accept her, which is absolutely false. But what really broke my heart is that my sweet girl, she was led to believe that she was broken, and she is not. She was made in the image of God, and she is beautiful, intelligent, and kind. And every single day since then, it has taken an unwavering effort to rebuild her fractured confidence in herself and to restore her shattered trust in us, her family, her protectors. We've dedicated ourselves to showing her that she is valued, she is safe, and she is loved. And we are slowly mending the threads of her self-worth and the bonds that were so carelessly broken. Witnessing the devastating harm that our daughter suffered drove my husband and I, with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom, to file a lawsuit against Rockford Public School District. We asked ourselves, how could we ever face another parent, look them in the eyes, knowing that their child, like ours, might be undergoing a life-altering transition without their knowledge or consent, and we had remained silent? We knew that we had to take a stand to protect not only our daughter, but other children and other families as well. And as a very private person, I was intimidated at first, but our Almighty God has given me the courage and the strength to take a public stand and hold that school accountable for nearly shattering my daughter's life. And no school district has the right to make life-altering decisions for a child without talking to their parents. Let alone concealing those decisions from us, ever, under no circumstances. So today, I am honored to be here, and I thank the Commission and to President Trump for the opportunity to share our family's story with you, and I pray that it will help ensure that no other families suffer.
Dr. Phil.
Well, I want to thank you for your testimony, and there's a lot that we have to acknowledge in the consistency of what we're hearing from these witnesses, Mr. Chairman, and the consistency that we're hearing is our society. We train our children to respect adults. We train our children when they go out into the world to, you respect adults, you mind adults, you do what adults tell you to do, and you respect authority. That doesn't seem to work anymore, because we've had a narrative hijacked in this country. And we're in a religious and cultural war. And, excuse me, we're in a religious and cultural war, and supposedly psychology and faith are supposed to be mutually exclusive, and they absolutely are not. I am a Christian, have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and have since I was 13 years old. And I see no inconsistency. What I realize is that we are in a religious and cultural war right now, and every single one of us is a combatant. Nobody can afford to sit on the sidelines. Not one of us can afford to sit on the sidelines. And make no mistake, not choosing is a choice. If you choose, I choose not to participate, that is a choice. You're making an active choice to say, I'm going to stay silent and cede my vote, my voice, to those that speak the loudest and those that are shrill. And we cannot afford to do that. And family is in attack, is under attack in America. Your family, your family, your family, your family, your family, you're all saying that you've been targeted and attacked. And it's terrible what is happening, because make no mistake, family is the backbone of this country and this society. It's about faith and family and country. And let me tell you, 99% of teachers will agree with that. It's not the teachers, it's the teachers' unions who are setting policy and pushing this. 99% of the teachers want to teach reading and writing and arithmetic and history and do what they say. And the problem on a societal level is, if you look at every major medical association in America, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, they've all signed off. They've all signed off on gender-affirming care, which, by the way, is not a thing. It's a marketing term. It's not a treatment. There is no treatment protocol for gender-affirming care. It's just a marketing term. And there are things such as the Cash Report, which was published in April 10th of 24 in the UK, that has looked to see, can you say there are not long-term problems with these testosterone blockers, hormone treatments, surgery? And the answer is absolutely no. There is no data to support this whatsoever. There are long-term problems with this, even social transition, as opposed to treating gender dysphoria with evidence-based therapies which are available. And the answer is that you can treat these things without long-term complications. And so we have teachers in the classroom doing exactly what you were saying, conspiring with your child to lie to their parents. What are they teaching these children? They're conspiring that it's okay to lie to your parents. And then they're dealing with these issues in the classroom, and they are not trained or prepared to do it any more than they're prepared to take out a spleen. You know, Ben, would these teachers be qualified to take out a child's spleen? No, and they're not any more prepared to deal with this. They're not trained to do this. It's not their fault, but they're not trained to do it. So you've got children who can't decide which pajamas to wear, and they're going to pick to change something that's irreversible in their lives. It's absolute insanity. Enough is enough and too much is too much. And we need to find our collective voice and stand up and say, enough is enough and too much is too much. And when you think about what has happened, the courage of you witnesses that have come here today, because we have a president that has sat down, who has looked at all the things to deal with in a world that is willing to go to war, a situation with economic issues, all of the things on the radar screen, but to sit down and thoughtfully say, you know what, we need to deal with religious liberty in this country. and to put all of this together to come here, and we need to be equal to the challenge. And God bless every one of you for coming here and sharing your story and challenging all of us to do something with it. So thank you. And we all need to be combatants in this war, this religious war and this cultural war. We all need to be combatants in that and say, we'll not allow this to happen. We will not allow this to happen. God knows the truth and expects us to live it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Bishop Barron?
Yeah, Dr. Phil really said what I wanted to say. Been so struck by the testimonies this morning and this afternoon, and they bring things that are more abstract home, and we really can feel what people are going through. The thing we're dealing with, the cultural war that Dr. Phil talks about, began, it seems to me, in Europe, mid-20th century, critical theory. It begins in the Academy of Germany and France. It comes into our country by the 1970s, gestates there for a long time, and then for a variety of reasons kind of spilled into the streets and the mediating institutions of our country in fairly recent years, and very quickly co-opted the mainstream of the institutions. And that's what we're seeing, that expresses itself in these really horrific policies that you're testifying to. The abuse of children involved here, that's what strikes me. When I was a kid, I think the first sex ed class we had was with a doctor and a priest, when I was about 7th grade, and discussing the biological dimension, but the moral and religious dimension of it. But they'd be talking to a 7-year-old about gender and gender queering and changing genders strikes me as psychologically abusive. And then this physical business is physically abusive to children. And so this is a problem that started in the high academy, came into our academy, came into our mediating institutions. No God, no objective moral value, a fluid human nature, and it's just downright dangerous. And I think we do, thank God, I think for the existence of this commission. But I agree with Dr. Phil, we have to really find our courage to stand against it. And I think at this point, there has to be executive orders and legislation to deal with it, because it's reached a point where you see the harm it's causing in people's minds and hearts and bodies. So I'm grateful for the testimony, because it sort of steels me in my own conviction about this. So thank you for that.
Carrie?
Jennifer. You're Jennifer? Oh my goodness. Your testimony really touched me as a mother. I have 2 children, and I can feel the heartbreak from your words. And I want to say thank you for spearheading this, all of you mothers and fathers. Thank you for your courage, because it really starts with you. How is your sweet girl doing today?
And thank you for asking. I'm glad that we're on the other side of it, because I wasn't sure what that was going to look like, and I don't know what's to come. But we are in a really good place with her. She is homeschooled. She is excelling in her learning environment. She is happy. She no longer asks me or my husband if she's loved or that she can trust us. So she's in a really good place, and she talks about her future as a mother and getting married, and yeah. So I am just so thankful that I'm thankful that we've gone over that hump and that we have just continued to love her and to let her know that she is made in the image of God, and that she is not broken, and she is perfect as she is, and that she cannot choose to be another gender. We've just been straight up honest and talk about truth with her. And once we pulled her out of that environment, like I mentioned in my testimony, it really was like pulling her from a cult. So it's just, we're just continuing to heal.
Dr. Anderson? Ryan?
Great, thank you. I wanted to draw out 3 lessons, I think, from the witnesses that we've had so far, just to kind of underscore these points. Hopefully they can make it into the recommendations that we eventually make as a commission. And the first goes back to the very first hearing we had. During my opening comments, I said frequently religious liberty violations are a result of unjust laws in the first place. And I think if you listen to the witnesses just now, to have a child transitioned, period, let alone behind a parent's back, that is simply unjust. It doesn't matter if the parent is religious or non-religious. It doesn't matter if that student is religious or non-religious, right? To be doing this to minors at schools without parental involvement, consent, that in and of itself is unjust. And so I think same thing is true for the Montgomery County school situation, or the, what was the book that you had to read to your buddy, right? Any student who is being indoctrinated with gender ideology is being misserved by the school system, right? These are unjust policies with these book mandates, unjust policies with these secret transitions. And so I think first and foremost, rather than just asking for an opt-out or religious carve-out, we should be pushing back on the unjust policy, right? The secular parents in Montgomery County shouldn't be subjected to this. And so anyway, I was so grateful for what President Trump said this morning about he went through the litany of everything they've done to combat gender ideology. And that's important. We can't just religiously, liberally opt ourselves out of this. We also need to directly combat it. So that was the first point, is that these unjust laws are frequently the underlying problem, and we need to fight on all fours there. Second, and this really came out in this morning's witnesses, it seems that there's a certain type of public school administrator who thinks that functional, practical atheism is neutrality. One of the students said that she was told by the principal, well, not everyone believes in God. And therefore, the school is going to make everyone pretend that they don't believe in God, right? We're going to practically be atheists at this school as if that equals neutrality. The founder's vision was that Jewish students could be authentically Jewish, Muslim students could be authentically Muslim, Protestant students could be authentically Protestant, Catholics could be authentically Catholic. It would be pluralistic theism and deism in the public schools. We've now gotten ourselves in a place where we think the naked public square should now be applied to the schoolroom, right? And we should have naked schoolrooms. This is the imagery from Richard John Newhouse, Father Newhouse, who wrote that book back in late 80s, early 90s. I think that's a huge problem here, is that we've allowed ourselves to think that secularism is somehow neutral, and it's not. And then the third thing, I was struck by the speaker this morning who said something along the lines of, my faith in Jesus isn't something added to my story, it is my story. Almost everyone, I think everyone who spoke today, I could see that through their body language, through what they said, that they're living lives of integrity, where their faith is integrated with every other aspect of their life. And so my challenge here for the commission is, I think we should make as strong of an argument as we can for why school choice itself should be a requirement of religious liberty. And I really appreciated President Trump this morning in his prepared remarks. He spoke about school choice. He spoke about parental rights. I think free exercise of religion, parental rights and education, school choice, these things all go together. My wife and I, we're blessed. We have 5 children. We live in Loudoun County. Loudoun County competes with Montgomery County to see which one can be more woke and which one can indoctrinate the kids more aggressively. We could never send our kids to the government-run schools. Thankfully, we have the resources to send our kids to a classical Christian school. Why should people in our county who don't have those financial resources be trapped in the government-run schools, right? That is the violation. And I think we have to go on all fours.
Reverend Franklin?
I think, Shay, when you were in your testimony, it was mentioned that the teacher and the administrators, principal, were promoted, if I'm not correct. And when there was hearings, the teacher unions all showed up with their T-shirts all supporting the teachers that have done this. And if we want to fix a problem, we have to identify what needs to get fixed. And the one thing that, there's a thread that kind of runs through all this, and it's called the unions. And we say cultural wars, and we say, I don't think it's so much of a cultural war. I mean, I don't think most of culture understands what's going on in these schools. It's a very subtle, demonic type takeover of our children, and is being forced down the throats of people by unions. And so I don't know, Mr. Chairman, there needs to be some thought about making these unions accountable.
Thank you. I find it interesting in Texas, and Dr. Phil, you talked about we're combatants. We're seeing this move towards school choice, more and more states. Texas is the latest. You see people quietly leaving the schools is what's happening. So they're combatants, but they're quiet about it. So this is what's going on, but they're not in the fight like all of you are. We see homeschool in Texas. It was illegal to homeschool 40 years ago, and now we think in the last 3 years it's doubled, somewhere around 700,000 students. We don't know exactly how many. There's also an interesting phenomena that in 2019 in Texas, we had 5.4 million students in public schools. That's more than 26 states have people. 5.4 million. We add 1,000 people a day, but today we only have 5.5 million kids in school. So how is it, now the lower birth rate is a part of that, how is it that we are now the second most populous state in the country, and yet the school population over 6 years has only increased by 100,000 kids? It tells you people are walking away, but they're not telling enough people why they're walking away. So your testimony has been really powerful today, and these are all great points that will be in our final report. And Dave, you're our last witness on this panel.
Thank you, Chairman Patrick, Vice Chairman Carson, and members of the commission. I want to just jump right in because of all the comments we've had. Interesting, as Dr. Anderson was speaking, I thought he got my presentation and was actually looking at it. But I wanted to focus today on the two main areas where I believe public schools are failing American parents and their children and trampling on religious liberty. One of them is, rather than concentrating on what we used to call the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, schools are now pushing these radical social agendas that often violate religious beliefs of parents. We'll talk about some of those similar to the Meads. But second, even though it has presented no real impediment to the practice of religion for the last decade and a half, the Establishment Clause still rears its ugly head that we have to cleanse all religion from public schools, which is so far from the truth. I think these are the two-headed monster, if you will. So just talking about a few instances of religious hostility. We heard from cute little Lydia this morning about her mask. What was interesting about it is her mask didn't say Jesus loves you, it said Jesus loves me on it. It was her own personal faith. And the fact that a 9-year-old has been brave enough and the courage to go to school with that mask on, regardless of what else she sees, and then go to her parents and say, look, I think this is wrong. They told me to take my mask off. I think there's something wrong with that. What was interesting about that case was there was no policy that prohibited a religious mask. There was no policy that prohibited words on the mask. When they looked up the policy, as her mom, she said she was curious. We've known them for years. Both are great parents. Looked up all the research, all the policies. There wasn't anything that addressed it. When he finally gave them a copy of the policy, he actually changed the policy right before he sent it to them to cover his own tracks. And the only reason was, we can't let this little girl go to school with a mask that says Jesus loves me. In this country, that's incredible. I mean, all the things that go on in public schools that you should be concerned about, that certainly isn't one of them. So it's one of these things where you see this reaction almost to anything religious in the public schools about the stories that we heard today. Another one real quickly is similar to the talent show story you heard this morning. We had a young gentleman, Brian Hickman, out of California. This kid was one of the most special kids you ever want to meet. He had cerebral palsy. He's been through more surgeries and physical struggles than almost all of us will in a lifetime. For an upcoming talent show, he wanted to perform to a Christian song called We Shine. He was excited. He was practicing at his church for weeks. He was ready to do it. When he went to the auditions, school officials told Brian's mother that the song was, quote unquote, too religious, and get this, it said Jesus too many times. I'm not really sure what the school thought the right number of Jesus was in that song, but apparently whatever it was too many. But the school there similarly didn't have a policy that banned religion. It didn't have a policy that said anything about the songs that could be chosen. If you looked at some of the lyrics for what the other kids were choosing, you would want them banned from school. They allowed those to happen. What the school said was the separation of church and state required it. And there have been Supreme Court cases for the last several decades that have taken care of that. That's no longer an issue in the schools, but we still have school administrators being taught by not only state school boards, by policies in the schools, by the unions. We still have this force that are teaching your average school official and teacher, which I think are good-hearted, to say, look, this is what the law is, and they don't know any better. So one of the areas I think we need to address is educating the teachers, educating school officials on what the actual separation of church and state is, which is not this ban on anything religious. It's basically the freedom of religion under the Constitution to allow robust exercise of religion regardless of your faith. And that's what needs to be taught to our officials. Interestingly, when Brian and his parents filed that lawsuit, we got a good resolution. He got to perform in the talent show on that Friday night, which was a couple of days away, so we were kind of scrambling to get something filed. The coolest thing was when Brian did his song, we didn't know what the community reaction was going to be. Brian got a standing ovation at the talent show. And the icing on top of the cake was we got that policy changed that protected more than 500,000 students who are now allowed to exercise their faith at events at public schools. So really neat for Brian and his family standing up. But one of the most chilling threats, I think, these days is what Jennifer talked about, and that is schools indoctrinating students in these current social issues, where school officials not only decide they know better than parents about how to raise their child, but the fact that, as Ryan mentioned, that they're hiding it from parents, it's just truly egregious. This is not an isolated occurrence. Chairman, in your state, in Texas, we've got a situation in the Houston area school district where they did the same exact thing. They were socially transitioning our client's daughter, and they were lying to the parents about it for months and months over 2 school years. And whenever the parents raised it and said, look, we're taking care of it, please don't do this, don't call her by pronouns that are the wrong sex, they said no. Not only did they ignore it, but they said, we have a right under the law to do this to your children even without your permission, and that's in Texas. We have families in New York that are going through similar experiences. But one of the ones that's just as egregious is where public schools are passing these policies where they're forcing young girls to share restrooms, locker rooms, and even sleeping accommodations on school trips with boys. In Colorado, we have a family that we represent, the Wales family, that sent their daughter on a school trip here to DC, which I think we've all done when we were kids. It was great coming here, seeing all the monuments and everything in Washington. They found out on the night she was about to go to sleep that they scheduled her to room with a boy with 2 other girls. And then her daughter was supposed to end up in the same bed as this boy, never telling the parents or the daughter that this was going to happen. And when the daughter found out, it was only because the young man told her. And they were like, no, it's fine. She could sleep in the other bed, even in the same hotel room where they're changing and dressing. And what was interesting, when we challenged this, the school district is still defending their policy and saying that they have a right to decide under their quote-unquote non-discrimination policies that they get to room these young men who identify as girls with the young women at these young ages. So these are the stories that I think are the most egregious. And this is not education. This is not what the schools are for. This is not the 3 R's that we talked about. This is indoctrination, it's coercion, it's deception. It's cloaked in an arrogance that these school officials think they know better than all the parents that we've heard from about how to raise their kids. And I think it's one of the most serious threats that we have today to parental rights and religious liberty. So how do we protect them? We talked about a couple things already. One, I would recommend passing the Federal Families' Rights and Responsibilities Act. There are several states have similar legislation, and it covers almost everything we've discussed today. It makes sure the schools disclose everything that they're doing, whether it's an opt-out, whether it's field trips, whether it's curriculum. It makes sure it respects the parents' rights in the public school. Almost every single lawsuit, the response by the school district is, is that parents don't have a right to control the curriculum. That's their response as their young daughter is supposed to sleep with a boy on a field trip. That's their response when they're teaching kindergarten students about how many different genders there are and it's fluid. Their response is, you don't have any right to control the curriculum, and I think that's a major problem. We talked about, Ryan talked about school choice. Educational freedom is so important, not only for voucher programs, not only for release time education, but those parents who choose to stay in public schools, not to be vilified, not to be ostracized, not to be kicked out, but to have a voice and have a right to stay in that school so they could be salt and light to others. How many people are looking at these young boys and girls saying, wow, look at how courageous they are, I wish I could do that. But they're too afraid to take a stand. And last thing I would say is, we need to educate parents and students about what their rights are. In prepping for this, I read a study recently that said only about 1 in 3 Americans even know that religious freedom is in the First Amendment. How can you defend your rights when you don't know what they are? So I would recommend actually doing training both for parents and school officials on what actual First Amendment rights are, so that freedom of religion for all religions is respected in our public schools. Thank you for your time today.
I only introduced him as Dave Cortman with Americans Defending Freedom, so I wanted to do that officially. Kelly?
Sure. You know, one of the thoughts that came to my mind, both in the earlier testimony and the ones now, is when Jesus said, better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea than to make one of these little ones stumble. I mean, we have to address this. Dave, I appreciate your recommendations, and I just want to add one to the list, I guess, because I know we keep track of all these, what we say in this, and we're going to go back and look at all these later. But we had a Department of Education guidelines on religious liberty that President Clinton put in place. But there's been so many cases since then, including on parental rights, Major Mahmoud, and I think those ought to be updated and strengthened so that they're accurate now. And then the follow-up to that is, obviously the president has shown he's willing to do this with universities. We need to make it that any school district that does not follow these has their federal money taken away from them. And then maybe we can add, Dave, your suggestion into that their training is responsible under those guidelines. And then that is something where we can begin to hopefully educate the school districts, and there's a consequence if you're doing this to the people in your school district.
And take the state money away as well. Some of that is constitutionally required, but we can work on that. Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've really been struck today in the testimony by almost to a person. All of y'all have said, you know, I'm not out for my 5 minutes. I'm a private person. I'm standing up so that others don't have to go through what we've gone through. And I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for what you're doing, because for each of you on this stage, there are other children and families and parents that will not have to go through what you have had to do, for being our standard bearers, for being the first through the wall that gets bloodied. And I just, especially Shay, I just want to single you out if I can. We talk a lot about courage. We talk a lot about what that means and what that looks like. You and your mom, everyone on this panel, everyone that we've heard today are courageous. Yeah. And you are standing, you're taking the heat, you're taking the arrows so that no one else has to go through. And shame on us if we do not honor your courage and your tears and your agony and your sorrow by standing up and using the platform the president has given us to also stand with you in ensuring that no other child or family or individual has to go through the horrible stories that we have heard today. Thank you all so much.
Bishop Barron.
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much for that presentation. I very much enjoyed it and found it clarifying. I think everybody in this room would agree that the anti-establishment clause has been kind of grossly overread, overinterpreted in an academic setting. But just for the sake of clarifying my own thinking and with our opponents in mind, give me an example of what would be a violation of the anti-establishment clause in an academic setting. So we all know these are kind of gross violations of that principle. What's an example of where you say, yeah, that really is a violation of it?
I think the easy example comes to mind is forcing students to pray outside of their religious faith.
Yeah, so compelling.
So compelling coercion. There's different types of tests under the Establishment Clause. I won't bore you with them, but a lot of the justices say that the right test is, am I coercing you to violate your faith? Are you participating in some speech or act that violates your particular religious freedom? That would be a clear violation of the Establishment Clause. And don't forget, the Establishment Clause was meant to be a restraint on the government. Right. It's not directed toward individuals, which it's been used as a weapon to silence religious speech, but it's meant as a restraint on government in the same phrase as the free exercise of religion, which is meant to give the most robust religious protection for all faiths in our country.
That's helpful.
Reverend Franklin, you mentioned the unions, and I was sitting here thinking that it really is a huge impact because we think of schools of education where our teachers come from, and so we also have to focus on those schools. But today in Texas, and it's pretty much this way across the country, more than half of our teachers do not come from higher education. They come from the private sector, people who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s who decide they want to become teachers. So obviously they haven't been indoctrinated by a university, some liberal campus somewhere. They're actually coming in wanting to teach. They've decided they want to do that as a career, and they are then being indoctrinated by the unions and very often the school boards and the school administrators. Those are very powerful lobbies, the Texas Association of School Administrators, the Texas Association of School Boards. Very, very powerful lobbies, and each state is different. For example, in Florida, you have a school district per county roughly. I think there's 68 or 69 counties, so you deal with 69 superintendents. In Texas, we have over 1,200 school districts, so that's 1,200 superintendents and 5,000 board members, and they have a tremendous political influence in elections and all along the line, and most parents don't really understand what's going on. So we have to focus on higher education. Those unions are really key, so I'm glad you brought that up. Eric.
In listening to many of these stories, it struck me that they sound like stories that you would hear from the former Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Both places of which share a spiritually dark ideology. And not just, certainly not, there's no such thing as neutrality. It's ultimately a God-hating atheism. It's demonic. It's spiritually very, very dark. And the idea that this has entered America, we all have to say, is staggering. It's a staggering thing that the long march through the institutions over the decades has succeeded to where we have an elite class that dares to think that they know better than parents. You know, even if you do know better than parents, shut up, you're not the parent. Parents have rights. But the idea that has crept into American life, because there was a time in American life where everyone understood parents, family, that is sacred and you have no business. So the fact that through the sexual revolution, which needs to be repealed, these bad ideas have entered. I remember in the mid-'70s when I was in junior high school in Danbury, Connecticut, they introduced health class, and it's the same kind of thing. Why is some lesbian gym teacher going to talk to a mixed class about sexuality, at the time, I remember thinking, this is absurd. Why are we supposed to be learning history and math and so forth? Why do we have to go to a quote-unquote health class to hear about this? So it has been it's crept in over the decades that somehow the government in public schools has the right to talk to kids about stuff that they do not have the right to talk to about. And so I think part of the recommendation has to be, and maybe this goes to Linda McMahon, but public schools have no business getting involved in any of this. They have no business. They never had any business talking to kids about issues that are fundamentally spiritual, that deal with the human person. They just have no business doing that, and that these worldviews are very, very dark. Also, you know, the idea of being able to opt out. You know, you kind of have to think, how pathetic is it that we're like, could I please opt out? My goodness. And Ryan said it, Dr. Anderson. You know, forget about us, because most of us maybe come from healthy families where the damage can be undone. But what about these poor kids whose parents don't know any better, and they send them to the public schools, and they're being indoctrinated, which with ideas that are now no longer just bad ideas, but they're satanic. To talk to little children about these things is child abuse. It is horrific. The idea that, I mean, anybody, I speak as a Christian, you're supposed to care about the least of these. We're supposed to care not just about me and my family, but all the kids in America and all the families in America. They're trying to put food on the table. They send their kids to public school. They pay their taxes. And they're being indoctrinated with this, in some cases, tremendously damaging information. To hear young Shane have to be the buffer between this little kid hearing about this sick stuff that no child should ever have to hear about. We in the American church ought to care about those folks, not just about our rights, but about the idea that kids are being indoctrinated with these very, very bad ideas. And when you talk about the Establishment Clause, there is clearly now a religion has been established among the secular cultural elites. It is a secular, dark religion. They don't call it a religion. They pretend that it's neutral. It is not neutral. And that worldview is being forced on children across America with our tax dollars. That is a violation of the Establishment Clause. It needs to be called what it is. It's the imposition of a worldview which amounts to a religion. And then I guess finally I want to say that what Dr. Phil said, that we are all combatants. The fact of the matter is that is right, and I hold churches and pastors most responsible. If you're going to a church that pretends like this is not our problem, we just want to preach the gospel, I say by the grace of God, you need to get out of that church, because it has been the abdication of the church in all of this, in discipling its flock, that we are all to be combatants. We are all to get in the game. We're to care about our communities, and we ought to speak very strongly against this. Even if it doesn't affect my family, it's affecting other families. And the timidity, and in many cases the cowardice of so-called Christians ultimately has led us to where we need a religious commission on this. So there you have it.
Witnesses, thank you. And members, we're a little behind, but this was a great discussion. We have another panel coming immediately right after. Shay, I just want to tell you, I've been really fixated on your listening to, you listen to everyone else, not just give your testimony. And I could see you react to some of their testimony. You have soulful eyes. You have a soulful spirit. And I don't know what you're going to do as an adult, but you will be a great leader because you care and love people and you love God. Thank you. Good. Paula?
Thank you all so much. We can't overemphasize that. I'd just like us to consider as a committee and commission here to take a very holistic approach. Perhaps as the parents and the community and the legal, we focus a lot on the legal, and that's so important. But as a pastor for many years in a ministry for 42 years, I'm thinking, what about the emotional support? I heard so many people say, I'm lonely, I walk through this alone? What about the psychological, the trauma support? The problem is when we're dealing with it, if we get great laws, we've got to get rid of the unjust laws and policies and everything, right? We look at government as a whole being anti-religious. We know, Chairman Den, that as we are looking at the grants that are going out of the government, they're 99% going to the wrong place. It's not a level playing field. People of faith are largely discriminated against, and unfortunately, faith has 80%, fortunately, 80% and higher success in almost every program, while pure secular has 20% and less. Don't we think Americans deserve the best of everything? So if I could get like a list of, we all think we know what it took to walk through this. I just wrote down legal, emotional support, trauma care, family stress. How many families break up under this kind of pressure? We lost our daughter to cancer. It put a tremendous stress on our family. Press, social media, security. There were so many things mentioned. If we look and say, all these things were needed for me to get through this, you are the brave ones, the perseverers, the ones with the backbone to get through this. I think, how can we help in a holistic way, knowing every part of government, what needs to be touched?
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you. Let's give them a hand if we can. Thank you, members. We're going to begin our last panel of the day. If you can take your seats, please. Eliza Lewin, forgive me, I introduced you on the last panel, so my error. Can everybody be seated, please? You have the floor. Yes.
Sorry for that confusion earlier.
All on the chairman. Chairman takes all responsibility for mistakes. Okay.
Well, Chairman Patrick and Commissioners, thank you for inviting me to appear here today. My name is Eliza Lewin, and I am president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, a nonprofit legal advocacy organization that's headquartered here in Washington, D.C., whose mission is to advance the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promote justice for all. In addition, I have a law practice, together with my father, Nathan Lewin, where we have handled numerous religious liberty matters and where I had the privilege to argue the case of Zivotofsky versus Kerry before the U.S. Supreme Court. That case, which involved the right of an American citizen born in Jerusalem to list Israel as the place of birth on his U.S. passport, paved the way for President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And I'm honored to have been appointed by President Trump to serve on the legal advisory board of this commission. I've joined this panel to share with you how K-12 public schools are not immune from the severe spike in anti-Semitism afflicting this country. At the Brandeis Center, we hear almost every day from students and parents who have been targeted on the basis of their actual or perceived shared Jewish ancestry. For example, In Massachusetts, Jewish students were subjected to repeated bullying and harassment, including by students who gave Nazi salutes in the hallways, divided themselves into teams called Team Auschwitz and Team Hamas during athletic games. They drew swastikas on notebooks and on school property, and they used anti-Semitic slurs, including kike, dirty Jew, and go to the gas chamber. At a public school in North Carolina, a middle school student who was not Jewish, but who wore an Israeli baseball jersey, a team jersey, to school one day and was thereafter perceived to be Jewish, for the next 2 years, his classmates persistently taunted and degraded him, referring to him as, quote, dirty Jew and filthy Jew. They invoked classic anti-Semitic stereotypes about Jews and money by calling the student, and I quote, a penny picker-upper. And they invoke the Holocaust by telling the student to, and these are quotes, get in a gas chamber, go back to your concentration camp, go to your oven, Jew, the oven is that way, and go die, Jew. And in California, a 6-year-old first grader at a public elementary school overheard older children on the playground say that Jews are stupid, and then went home visibly distressed and told his parents that he wished he was not Jewish because people don't like Jews. I was also reminded earlier when we heard the testimony of another client of the Brandeis Center, also in California, a Jewish Israeli high school student who was reprimanded after singing a song in Hebrew in her school's talent show. An administrator told her that she was, quote, in big trouble and that there will be consequences because her song allegedly made students feel unsafe and uncomfortable. Never mind that other students at the talent show sung songs in other languages, including Spanish and Korean, and that the song that she sang was a love song. But the fact that she sang it in Hebrew, her native language and the ancestral language of the Jewish people, the language of the Bible, made it something to reprimand and punish her, potentially punish her for. So these are just a few of the many stories that the Brandeis Center has heard and included in complaints that we have filed on behalf of K-12 parents and students. And I should say that in both the Massachusetts and the North Carolina stories that I described, that bullying went on for a couple of years, and the school did nothing to address the anti-Semitism. And at the end, both students felt compelled to leave the schools and had to transfer to other schools. This increased hostility towards Jews has not happened in a vacuum. It's facilitated by a deliberate, systematic effort to erase and deny the Jewish people's religious, cultural, ethnic, and ancestral history in the land of Israel. In a growing number of K-12 classes today, Jews and Israelis are portrayed as colonizers and oppressors, guilty of a litany of evils. But it's not possible to colonize a place that your ancestors are from. You cannot call Jews colonizers without first erasing the Bible and centuries of Jewish history. There is a term for this, and it's called erasive anti-Semitism. This anti-Semitism ignores evidence of the Jewish people's ancient and continuous presence in the land of Israel, including evidence exhibited here in the Museum of the Bible. Erasive anti-Semitism erases and denies who Jews really are and creates a false, evil narrative in its place, indoctrinating students and the school community to hate Jews. So how should we address this? Well, first, we must develop a zero tolerance for erasive anti-Semitism. We have to push back against those who rewrite history and deny the Jewish people's ancestral connection to their biblical homeland. Second, we need to hold the bullies accountable. Far too often, schools seek to address the situation by removing the Jewish students from the hostile environment rather than by ending the harassment that the Jewish students have endured. For example, schools have offered to take Jewish students out of a particular class or arrange for private tutoring or even permit a Jewish student to study from home. These, however, are not solutions because they isolate and ostracize the Jewish students while failing to address the underlying Jew hatred. Third, we need to institute effective training to educate the school community to recognize contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. We need to teach students, faculty, and staff that it is never okay to demand that Jews disavow their history and heritage in order to be accepted. We have seen the wave of anti-Semitism sweeping across college and university campuses, particularly in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. If we want to turn that tide, we must ensure that our elementary, middle, and high schools are not teaching our children to hate. We need to empower our students to recognize the myths and seek truth. So let me close with a quote from the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, which includes the United Kingdom. Rabbi Sacks once noted, when commenting on anti-Semitism, that irrational hate does not die. But then he continued and he added, and I quote, "But neither does the Jewish people. Attacked so many times over the centuries, it still lives, giving testimony to the victory of the God of love over the myths and madness of hate," close quote. And so I suggest to you that Rabbi Sacks's words sum up the task of this commission and our task today, which is to help ensure the victory of the God of love over the myths and madness of hate. Thank you.
Dr. Phil.
Thank you so much for what you were saying. You probably know that I'm very focused on this. I've spent most of my life since I was 10 or 12 years old focused on why people do what they do and don't do what they don't do. Probably pretty weird looking kid at the time for doing that at that age, but I'm really interested in what you think in this country the motivation is behind this anti-Semitism. I know how it expresses itself. You just gave us horrific examples of it, but I'm curious what you think the motivation is that makes young people invest this kind of energy in this sort of thing against their Jewish contemporaries. What do you think is motivating this?
So when it comes to the young children, I actually think, when it comes to the young children, I think it's part of what they are now being taught by the older people. But I think that the way anti-Semitism has historically worked is that whenever a society is unhealthy and it looks for someone to blame, the Jews become that scapegoat. And so I think that when you have an unhealthy society, and that's what's happened now, again, the Jews have become the scapegoat.
But why? Why the Jews instead of some other group? Is it because of this hard work and ethic and success?
I think that historically it's because the Jews have been the ones who've been courageous enough to maintain difference. And people suspect those who are different. And so throughout history, Jews, whether through their faith, through their religious practice, have been actually different from the rest of society, right? They keep their own strict dietary rules. They in some communities will dress a certain way. They have their Sabbath, right? And so the Jews are different. And if the Jews are different, it's always easier to scapegoat the group that's different.
So fear motivation.
I think it's fear. And I think that what happens now is I actually think that you have some who really do believe and engage in the Jew hatred, but you have an awful lot who are just kind of surrounded that group, and because of the way it's been messaged, right, to these students, as I say, there's this false narrative of what a Jew is. And so these students are actually being taught that the Jews are evil. And so if the Jews are evil and you want utopia, you want a better world, then let's push the Jews out of society and then we'll have that better world because they're the ones making it bad. And that's the problem. They don't understand the truth and they don't realize that what is being taught to them is an anti-Semitic stereotype and mischaracterization of who Jews really are.
Yeah, because of late, it's oppressed and oppressor. Everybody's either oppressed or oppressor, and so they're cast in that light. But the fear of the difference and the unknown, that's helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
I'm going to disagree. There are a lot of people that are different. It's not just the Jews are different. What makes the Jews particularly different and despised throughout history is because God loves the Jews, and the hatred of God focuses on the hatred of those whom he loves. So in history, that's been mostly Jews, also sincere, devout Christians. It is a spiritual issue.
Thank you, Eric. Ms. Lewin, the reason this rest of this panel is higher ed, but it was important to bring her because there's a sense in this country today that anti-Semitism is only at higher education. No, it's through K through 12 also. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is a member of our committee, couldn't be here today, but we are going to do a broader panel on anti-Semitism at one of our future hearings. So thank you for being here today. Let me go to Maggie. Do I say DeJong? Is that? DeYoung. All right. There you go.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much to this commission for holding this hearing and for all your work on religious liberty. I'm deeply grateful and very humbled to be here. I never expected that pursuing my dream to help hurting children would lead to a legal battle for our most basic freedoms. I graduated from Southern Illinois University Edwardsville with a master's in art therapy and counseling in May 2022. I chose this path because God gave me the passion to both fight for and preserve the innocence of children, especially those who've experienced deep, complex trauma. Through art therapy, I witnessed how expressive means can calm both body and mind and provide a mode of communication when oftentimes words are too difficult to even access. But while I was studying how to help others heal, I found myself betrayed by the very institution that was supposed to equip me for that mission. My program was small. It was just 11 students, and we became very close. We would talk about being in each other's weddings, and we cared for each other like family. But about a year in, something shifted. I came to Southern Illinois thinking that I was there to become a counselor. But I soon realized that the university expected me to adopt and promote a specific ideology, one rooted in Marxism and critical race theory. When called on in class, I shared my perspective respectfully, asking whether these ideas served the best interest of our future clients. Instead of respectful dialogue, my Christian and conservative beliefs were met with hostility, not only from classmates, but even the professors. But I didn't expect what came next. The university issued 3 no-contact orders against me. And if you're wondering what these are, so did I. Essentially, these are restraining orders, and they applied to on and off campus. It meant that I couldn't talk to, sit near, or even be in the same coffee shop as these 3 students. I was shocked. I asked what I had done, and the university said that I hadn't violated any policy. But without any communication or investigation, I received a threat of disciplinary consequences if I violated the no-contact orders. And they even copied a university police officer on each order to drive this threat home. After this, I stopped speaking in class. I was isolated and scared, like I was in a relationship with abusers, trapped in a system that punished me for having different beliefs. I thought back through every conversation that I'd had with these classmates. I couldn't think of anything that I'd done that could be taken as offensive, let alone aggressive, and I became afraid. And with fear came a sense of powerlessness. I started having trouble sleeping, I lost my appetite, and I began to worry. What might happen if my professors, who clearly disapproved of my views, decided to block me from graduating or finding a job? I reached out to ADF and they sent the demand letter to the university. 5 days later, they rescinded the orders. 2 weeks after that, they finally told me what my accusations were. 3 classmates had complained about some social media posts where I'd expressed my Christian and conservative views on current events. They claimed the mere expression of my views were microaggressions. One student said I was threatening because I couldn't embrace critical race theory, which I had said failed to treat people with dignity regardless of their race. She told the school I was threatening, even though in the same conversation I had with her, I praised her for having a beautiful heart and a deep compassion for children. Sadly, even after the no-contact orders were lifted, the attacks continued. The university officials refused to tell students that I hadn't broken any university policies. Instead, they emailed faculty, students, and alumni, implying that I had engaged in oppressive acts and misconduct. The university held a community meeting where students publicly attacked my faith and accused me of being racist, oppressive, and creating a toxic learning environment. But one of the most painful moments came when an art display titled "The Crushing Weight of Microaggressions" was displayed in our department. It featured a personal text I sent to a friend where I shared that even if we might disagree on some things, that I cared about her, but that my personal held beliefs were grounded in objective truth by the gospel of Jesus Christ. I was heartbroken to see my words so misunderstood. I loved my classmates, including this girl, and to this day, I wish we could have shared our diverse beliefs with mutual respect and kindness. But that was sadly not my experience. I wasn't punished for harming anyone. I was punished for having a different perspective, for being a Christian, and for asking honest questions. At a public university, which is supposed to be a marketplace of ideas, I was silenced for mine. I knew I couldn't just walk away. I live by Dietrich Bonhoeffer's quote, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act." I could not be silent knowing that what happened to me could happen to future students. Our freedoms are too precious not to defend. So I filed a lawsuit. But what weighs on my heart to this day is I should have never had to sue. Public universities have a duty to protect open dialogue, not punish it. They should welcome differences, not erase them. And no student should be shamed or silenced for their faith. Looking back, I can see how what was meant to break me, God used to shape me. Through the fear and betrayal, He gave me the courage to speak. Even when my voice shook. And He taught me to love even those who misunderstood or maligned me. I'm so grateful to President Trump and this commission for your bold work to protect our First Amendment freedoms, freedoms that belong to all of us, regardless of faith, race, or creed. The truth is, freedom is fragile, silence is costly, but courage is contagious. And I want to thank you all for being so courageous.
Our next witness is Norvila Kane.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today. I am truly honored to be with you. Proverbs says that the tongue has the power of life and death. But that's not just a verse from the Bible. It's my story. Words saved my life. When I was 16, I learned just how close I came to never being born. My mother was 17 when she found out she was pregnant with me. Already raising my brother alone, she was scared and overwhelmed. She felt she had no choice but to end my life through abortion. But God intervened through the voice of my grandmother. She empowered my mother to know she wasn't alone. Because of my grandmother's faith and my mother's yes to my life, I am alive and incredibly privileged to speak to you today. My family's story ignited a passion in me to empower other young women and instilled in me a desire to use my story to share God's truth, that every person is created in the image of God and has intrinsic dignity. From the moment of conception, God opened the door for me to share this truth during my studies at Queens College in New York by inspiring me to start our very own Students for Life group. I knew God was calling me to be that voice, to walk alongside young women facing what my mother faced, so they would know, you are not alone. There is hope. You can choose motherhood and live a fulfilling life. My college campus became my mission field. With the help of Students for Life of America, several classmates and I began the process of forming an official club to support pregnant women and parenting students on campus by providing resources, baby showers, scholarships, and community. To my dismay, we faced opposition at every turn. The Student Development Office discouraged us from even applying, but we persevered and carefully crafted a constitution and submitted our application. When we met with the Campus Affairs Committee, we shared that we wanted our club to promote women's health, offer support to pregnant women and parenting students, and cultivate a community that celebrates the dignity of every life. After cutting our presentation short, the committee said we'd hear back by the end of the day. We did not. A week passed, other student groups were approved, and we heard nothing. Finally, I reached out to the head of the Student Development Office, and without explanation, she told me that the college would not be recognizing us as a student group. I was stunned. This meant no meeting spaces, no access to campus resources, no student activity funds, which our tuition helped pay for, and no ability to host speakers and freely dialogue on campus. Public universities are supposed to be places where all students are free to share their beliefs, opinions, and worldviews. Queens College approved a wide variety of student groups every year, including pro-abortion groups. It was hard experiencing such blatant discrimination against living out my Catholic faith. Queens College wasn't just silencing our student group. They were silencing help and hope for pregnant women. They were silencing our voice. As I considered what to do, I remembered the circumstances that surrounded the dawn of my life. I recalled the difference my grandmother's encouraging voice made for my scared mother, and I knew I had no choice but to speak up for women and their unborn children. So, with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom, I filed a lawsuit against Queens College, not out of anger, but out of a conviction that every student deserves the right to speak, to serve, and to stand for what they believe. It wasn't easy being a college student taking on my alma mater, but the incredible gift of life is worth standing for. Eventually, Queens College changed its policy and officially recognized our club. When I graduated, our group was changing lives, and we had even launched a scholarship fund for pregnant women and new parents. This scholarship fund has now become its own foundation, the Kathleen Mullally Foundation, run by the young woman who succeeded me as president. Today, all across New York State, many women have been awarded funds to help care for themselves and their families while maintaining their studies. It stands as a beacon of hope that every life has inherent dignity and that women deserve better than abortion. I pray that my story will inspire college students to courageously live out their faith, and I hope that President Trump and this administration will continue their bold efforts to protect free speech and religious freedom at college campuses across our country. We know that words have the power to end a life, but they also have the power to save one. And it is up to us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you for the blessing of speaking here today.
Thank you. Sir, you're going to have to help me get your name just right, all right?
Yes,
Would you please introduce yourself?
it's Chike, and the long one
Yes.
is Yuzabunum.
Yeah. I thought it was Chike, but I wasn't sure if I could say Chike. Go ahead. So there we go.
No worries. I first want to thank Almighty God and my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. For the goodness of making all of this possible. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you guys this afternoon, and for each of you in doing what is right to protect religious liberty. As a child, my parents often spoke of the great freedoms America offers. These freedoms and the opportunities that they provide are why my parents moved here from Nigeria. They taught us that freedom is a precious gift, one to be protected at all costs. That's why I'm here today. In 2013, I enrolled in Georgia Gwinnett College in Lawrenceville, Georgia. It was during my time there that I embraced Christianity, a decision that brought me profound joy, and I felt compelled to share it with others. I'm convicted that this message is the greatest message that we could ever hear, that Christ came into the world to save sinners. And I know that sinners is not a politically correct term, but without sin, there is no need for a Savior. I was captivated by the glorious message of the cross of Jesus Christ and his ultimate sacrifice for humanity's redemption. My campus offered plenty of opportunities for this. Students were often out in public areas, sharing their public views and advocating for causes or handing out literature on topics that were important to them. I did the same, respectfully speaking about my faith with interested students. It was a chance to meet new people and share how Jesus had changed my life. But one day in 2016, a college administrator approached me and told me to stop. He said, if I wanted to share my faith with those who stopped by, I need to reserve one of the school's two quote-unquote speech zones, and these zones made up 0.001%, 0.0015% of the campus, about the size of a sheet of paper on a football field. And they were only open 10% of the week. But still, I honored the policy. I made my reservation, showed up on time, began sharing my faith. But within a few minutes, campus police stopped me again. They said someone had complained under the college's speech code, and I had to stop or face disciplinary action. I was surprised and confused. Here I was in the free speech zone, quote unquote, following all of the rules, and yet officials silenced me. At this moment, I realized I could not speak outside of the speech zones, or I cannot speak inside in them either. I contacted Alliance Defending Freedom and learned that my experience sadly wasn't unique. Many public colleges and universities use similar speech zones and speech code to silence students in violation of their constitutionally protected freedoms. I was deeply concerned. I thought back to the stories my parents told me about the unique freedoms that the United States offers, the promise that every American is free to speak without fear of government censorship. I knew I had a small part to play in preserving this legacy of freedom. So I made the tough decision to sue Georgia Gwinnett. The college first said that my speech sharing the words of Scripture, i.e., qualified as quote-unquote fighting words, and therefore wasn't protected by the First Amendment. Later, the school switched its strategies and tried to avoid accountability altogether. It revised its speech policies and asked the court to dismiss my case, insisting that it should no longer be held accountable for silencing me. Even though the college had censored me under its previous policies, both the district court and the 11th Circuit said that the college could escape accountability simply by changing its policy after the fact. justice delayed is justice denied suddenly took on a new meaning for me. If the government officials can violate our rights and then walk away with no consequences, the Constitution is an empty promise. And I knew that that wasn't the legacy I wanted for my future kids. So I persevered to make sure no other student on any other campus would be silenced by school officials for sharing their faith. My case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and Georgia Gwynnett's actions were so troubling that people from diverse political, religious backgrounds, Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, liberals, conservatives, all of them alike supported my case, and the right to speak freely was at risk. Thankfully, in a resounding 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that public university officials must be held accountable when they violate someone's constitutional rights. And for me, this victory was deeply personal. When I heard the court's decision, I thanked my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I also thought of my parents and how they believed the promise of this country and how they sacrificed for us to grow up with this freedom. But we still have work to do. Many students today feel the pressure to remain silent about their faith. Many are afraid of being labeled, canceled, or punished simply for speaking the truth in love. That's not the America that I want for my two kids, which is why I'm so grateful that President Trump and this commission is working to preserve our cherished freedoms. Free speech should not depend on the popularity of your views. Religious liberty should not be confined to zones. And the First Amendment does not end where a college campus begins. Almost 250 years ago, our founders declared that our freedoms come not from the government, but from God. And that government exists to protect those freedoms and not restrict them. That's the America that I came to. That's the America that I love. And that's the America that I want to help preserve. Thank you for the privilege of speaking today.
Dr. Phil, another combatant. Yes, yeah, general of combatants. And Reverend Graham, another soldier for you. Chike, we will not forget your passion, your voice, or your name ever again, all right? Okay. Any comments or questions? We'll go to our last witness of the day, Kimberly Colby.
Oh, following those people. Thank you, Chairman Patrick, Vice Chairman Carson, and commissioners for having these hearings on troubling but extremely important issues. For 4 decades at Christian Legal Society, or CLS as it's called, I've worked to protect religious students' right to meet for prayer and Bible study on their campuses, just like other student groups meet. CLS student chapters meet at law schools nationwide. All students of any faith or no faith are welcome at CLS meetings. And like many other faith groups, CLS chapters require their leaders to agree with their religious beliefs. Colleges allow hundreds of student groups to meet as recognized student groups for all kinds of speech, as Nervilia was explaining. Recognition allows a student group to reserve empty classrooms for free, to communicate with other students through the college website, and to apply for student fee funding. In the late 1970s, college administrators began to discriminate against religious student groups, claiming that allowing a student Bible study to use an empty classroom's heat and light violated the Establishment Clause. In 1981, the Supreme Court rejected this notion, instead ruling that freedom of speech protected religious groups' right to meet. It reaffirmed this right in 1995, and Congress protected high school groups in 1984. That should have been the end of discrimination against religious student groups. But deprived of the Establishment Clause as an excuse for excluding religious groups, some college administrators turned to their school's non-discrimination policy. Administrators claim that it is religious discrimination for a religious group to require its leaders to agree with its religious beliefs. But it is common sense and basic religious freedom for a religious group to want the leaders of its Bible studies and prayers to agree with its religious beliefs. I want to share two recent examples of this problem, one from Iowa and one from California. In 2017, a student group at the University of Iowa called Business Leaders in Christ, or BLINK, interviewed potential leaders. One candidate disagreed with BLINK's religious beliefs. He was welcome to remain a member, but not a leader. In response, the student formed his own religious group. That's good. The university recognized his group. Again, that's good. But then the student filed a discrimination complaint against BLINK, and the university took away BLINK's recognition. The university then launched an inquisition into other religious groups on campus. When two groups sought court protection, the university informed the court it would de-recognize 32 religious student groups if it won. Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Baha'i, and Christian student groups all would be excluded from campus. The student groups won, but only after 4 years of negotiation and litigation. Turning to California, a student group called Fellowship of Christian Athletes, or FCA, had met at Pioneer High School in San Jose, California, for over a decade. FCA student leaders, but not members, are required to agree with FCA's religious beliefs. In April 2019, a teacher posted FCA's religious beliefs regarding marriage and sexuality on his classroom whiteboard. Next to FCA's beliefs, he wrote, and I'm quoting, "I'm deeply saddened that a club on Pioneer's campus asks its members to affirm these statements. How do you feel?" End quote. The two FCA student leaders sitting in his class felt deeply hurt to see FCA's religious beliefs disparaged by their teacher in front of their class. The School Climate Committee decided that FCA's beliefs clashed with the school's values of inclusiveness and open-mindedness. The school revoked FCA's recognition. In other words, inclusiveness requires exclusion. When FCA students again sought recognition, their request was denied on the same day that the school recognized the Satanic Temple Club. FCA students continued to meet unofficially, but student protesters and the school newspaper disrupted their meetings. The harassment made the FCA leaders dread going to school. A district court sided with the school district, but on appeal, the FCA students won. Again, it had taken 4 years to regain recognition. I want to finish with a third case. In 2010, in CLS v. Martinez, a closely divided 5-4 Supreme Court sidestepped the issue whether a non-discrimination policy could be used this way to exclude religious student groups from a law school campus. The court focused solely on an all-comers policy, not the non-discrimination policy. The all-comers policy had first appeared during litigation. The school claimed that no student group could have belief-based leadership requirements. Justice Ginsburg, joined by Justices Stevens, Kennedy, Breyer, and Sotomayor, wrote that an all-comers policy was constitutionally permissible, but only if it uniformly deprived all student groups of the right to choose their leaders. Justice Alito, with Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Scalia and Thomas, dissented. Neither a non-discrimination policy nor an all-comers policy, they explained, could override a religious group's right to choose its leaders. Martinez conflicts with past free speech law and current free exercise jurisprudence. But its confusion is creating great harm for religious students on campuses both at college and high school. Our democracy depends on schools teaching and modeling the essential lesson that the First Amendment protects everyone's free speech and religious beliefs, especially the speech and beliefs of those with whom we disagree. Excluding a religious student group because of its religious beliefs is precisely the wrong lesson for educators to teach the students.
Thank you. Kelly?
Kim, it's great to see you. It's been a long time. I wonder if you have any recommendations of something we could do. And even if you don't, I would love to hear from you later because I consider you a bright legal mind for many years. And I'd love it on what you addressed, but then also maybe you can think about this. A big problem we've started to address that's come up, like Chike's case and other people's, courts create all these gimmicks to avoid deciding the issue. And that is a huge harm to religious freedom. We understand human beings would rather avoid